Hey, and welcome back to another video. This week I would like to talk about how I edit in ON1 Photo RAW as someone who is very much used to editing in Adobe Photoshop Lightroom. Now, if you've been following my weekly edit series, you will know that I really enjoy playing around and editing images in different software programs that we use as photographers to edit our images. Now, as I've mentioned, this week I would like to show you how I use ON1 Photo RAW, but also how I set it up to work mostly like Lightroom does. Because when I'm editing in Lightroom, as you might know, and I'll show you in shortly, is there's sort of a set way that we work through editing our images, and I find myself, especially in ON1 Photo RAW, sort of not needing but wanting to edit in that way. And ON1 is it's very similar but also very different to Lightroom, but it's also possible to set it up in a way that you can edit almost in the same way. And at the end of the video, well, either you can follow along and set it up on ON1 Photo RAW like I do, so that it works similarly to Lightroom. And if you like, at the end I've also made a little preset for ON1 that you can download. I'll leave a link in the description below. So before this also carries on like a long, or becomes a long video like my weekly edit series, let's jump in and I'll show you how I do it. Okay, so here we are in Lightroom, and I have selected an image from our trip to Corfu in Greece last year. What's it say? This June. End of June, July. It was, I'll quickly jump into the develop module by pressing D. So yeah, this was sort of this was the first morning there. I just sort of take a little stroll. I just took a little stroll down to the waterfront or to the beach, Pebble Beach, and it was just this classic scene of two deck chairs already out on the beach with an umbrella ready to go. And this beautiful Adriatic, or not Adriatic, excuse me, Ionic, someone can correct me in the comments, Ionic ocean. Anyway, it was warm, blue, lovely, even at 6 o'clock in the morning. That's not the point of this video. So, like I mentioned, in Lightroom, in the develop module, we have on the right hand side here all the things we can do to the image. From basic, with things like white balance, exposure, highlights, texture, blah 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 blah. We have the tone curve, the color mixer, where we can adjust the hue, saturation, and luminance of individual colors. We have the color grading module, where we can apply different color tones to the highlight, shadows, midtones. Detail, where we can add sharpening and noise reduction, lens correction, transform if you're doing sort of architectural stuff, lens blur, which is quite new to Lightroom, effects, where we can add grain and vignette, and of course the becoming more and more famous calibration tab in the develop workspace in Lightroom. Now, if we quickly jump to ON1, I've got the same image. It's edited in Lightroom. Here it's not edited. So I'm going to open it up quickly. Either way, you can also press D, or you can just double click on it and it'll jump into the editing workspace in ON1. Now, if you will see here in ON1 on the right hand side as well, you have everything you can do to the image. However, you would start in tone and color. Now here, if we jump, so I'm going to jump back and forth between Lightroom and ON1 quickly. So in Lightroom, if we start from the top, we want to do the same stuff in ON1. So white balance, exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, texture, clarity, dehaze, vibrance, saturation. Quite a mouthful. So that's the basic tab. So if we go to ON1, you see it actually has all the same things as well. Exposure, contrast, highlights, midtones. Midtones actually Lightroom doesn't have, but nice to have here. Shadows, whites, blacks, it's got dehaze, structure, it's a bit like texture and clarity mixed together, and then white balance, saturation, and vibrance. And it's got this little purity module, which is quite nice. I think I've mentioned it before in the weekly edit, but I'm going to not dive too deep into, or at all into that right now. back in Lightroom, we then have the tone curve when we move on. So here in ON1 in the develop panel, there's actually no tone curve. Now you add that in the effects panel via a filter. So what I do pretty much, so if I'm edit for each image, so I add, you can go here and then you add a tone curve, which is going to be here, curve. So that's the tone curve module done. We then go down to color mixer. Let's quickly just go. Okay, so sorry, we were getting lost here. Into the color mixer, so that's where you manipulate individual color channels. So back in ON1, we can add the, I think it's the color balance, perhaps. No, I'm getting ahead of myself, so we'll get rid of the color balance. It is color adjustment. So there we go. So here you can see you can select the individual color channels and adjust the hue, saturation, and luminance or brightness. And you can also adjust the range, actually, how much is affected. Now back in Lightroom, you can see you can do the same: hue, saturation, and luminance, which is brightness. And in Lightroom, you can also click on this little circle and then select the color. And in ON1, you can do the same by selecting a color. Okay. So let's close that down. So that's that done. And color grading in Lightroom, which is, I just did that, which would be color balance in ON1. So you can see the same Lightroom color wheels, ON1 color wheels. So you can add different color tones to the midtones, shadows, highlights, and you can manipulate the balance. Zero that out, and you can also add presets. If you just hover over them, you'll see them affecting the image. Okay, so color grading done in Lightroom. Now detail, sharpening, noise reduction in ON1, that's back in develop. If you just carry on down here, noise and sharpening, pretty self-explanatory. You get the classic version or way of doing it, where you can adjust the noise reduction and the sharpening, or you can also try their AI options, no noise AI and tack sharp AI, or you can do both, double whammy. Back in Lightroom, so lens corrections in ON1, also develop module, pretty self-explanatory, lens corrections. And in Lightroom, moving on, transform, which is like perspective correction. ON1, same story. And lens blur, I don't think ON1 has something similar. I don't often or don't actually use this at all. Maybe some of you guys do. Effects, so that's vignetting and grain. Now often in Lightroom I'll actually add a vignette in a completely different way using a radial filter, and grain is grain. ON1, nice thing about ON1, it's also in effects under filter, so you would go to add filter and vignette is somewhere here. Ah, there we go, add a vignette, and grain, so here it's called film grain, I think. Excuse me, film grain. So often when you add these modules or these filters in ON1, it already has a preset applied. So if we zoom in to 100% here, maybe on the sky, you can see it's already applied Kodak T-Max 100. So let's toggle that off. Yeah, so it's actually added quite a bit of noise there. Not bad, but just something to be aware. So in the preset that you guys can download down below, I've actually gone and zeroed out, or not disabled, yeah, basically zeroed out each filter so that it's added, but it doesn't have any effect yet. So you can go in and then add what and how much you want. One of the great things about, or nice things about ON1 is you can also change the opacity of each filter. So it's almost like a layer, essentially. So let's quickly go back to Lightroom. Lastly, you have the calibration tab. Now in ON1, I don't actually curves, color adjustments, color balance, vignette, film grain. Yeah, I think that's pretty much that, top to bottom. So like I mentioned, in ON1, it doesn't have a color calibration filter. The closest I've come, and you can play around here yourself if you want. I'm not too fussed about it, but you can split toning works a little bit. There's a lot of the classic split toning we used to have in Lightroom before color grading came along. And then there was another one, filter. It replaced color actually, as counterintuitive as it sounds, because like in the color calibration, it affects the way globally affects the way that Lightroom interprets the different colors, and you can shift the balance as well. Now, this is not exactly the same, but if you want, and again, I'm sure a lot of you will correct me in the comments, I'm not the world's expert in this, like I mentioned in my weekly edit series. I'm also learning most of these programs as I'm going along. So let's say you want to change the way the blue interacts or looks. So you select that as the target color, and color to change, you can then change the hue. So let's say we want it to be, it was quite blue, and to be a bit more sort of in the aqua range. And then we can pull that on and off. So it's just changing it slightly on a more lighter color. To change the saturation, you see how that goes. And then you can also change the brightness, as well as the range that's affected. So turn that on and off quickly. So you see that just changed the way that the blues are interpreted by the image in a very either very strong or very subtle way, and then we can also change the opacity. So I'm just going to remove that. One thing that I also normally add by default in ON1 that I don't have in Lightroom is dynamic contrast. So I'm just going to add that, like you, and it also automatically adds a little bit of dynamic contrast, as you can see in the image here. Toggle that off, on, and so what I like to do is actually just zero out the opacity before I save the preset, and then it's not added. So as I add it, I can then just up the opacity to where I like, and that's job done. So once we've added all these filters, and if we look back in Lightroom, so now I've gone top to bottom here as well. So we have everything that we have in Lightroom in ON1, and in Develop, like I mentioned, it's pretty self-explanatory. You can also just work top to bottom. So between Develop and the Develop panel and the Effects panel with filters, we are set. Now what I will do on ON1 bottom left here, you can open the preset tab. There are many presets here. Now what you can do is you can say, I've already created a category here called CM effects. So if I click on that, then you have my what did I call it? CM Photo Lightroom LR Flow. So click on that, wait for it to, this is, so what do we do here? Okay, so we have, there we go. So then in ON1 we can go to settings, save settings as preset, and now here then we can give it a name. So we can say LR Flow 02, and now you can specify what you would like to save. In this case, I'm just going to save the effects we added here, because when the program opens up, it obviously has the developed stuff already sorted, and I just want to add these individual filters to have all the options that I would have for editing that I normally have in Lightroom. So select that, And then here we can choose in which in sort of under which category we want to save it. Like I mentioned, you can either add a new category or so add a new one, or you can save it under a current one. So we're going to save it under my one there, and then we're going to save it. And now you can see there it is. So if we reset the image, reset all settings, yes, so you can see all the filters disappear. Develop also goes back to 0. Now, when I open up an image in ON1, what I will do, I will just click on my, sort of, it's almost like a workspace preset. So I'll click on that, and then you can see it's automatically added all my filters here, and then I can go back to develop and start editing the image as I please. This particular image doesn't need a lot of editing in my opinion, but I'm not going to bore you with that. That is basically the gist of it. Yeah. And then if we go back to Lightroom quickly, then I can edit in ON1 in the same way that I would in Lightroom when I work my way from top all the way down to the bottom here. Yeah, I think that's about that. Let's end it there. Yeah, perfect. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found it useful in some way. And yeah, click on the link below in the description if you want to download the preset, or just follow along in the video and create it yourself, and maybe add your own or create some variations, and let me know how you get along. Cool. I will see you in the next video.